have you ever had a flat-out disagreement with a friend, a respected friend, as to whether an outfit were beautiful and excellent?
Not particularly, no. That's all I've really got there.
What would happen if you were to have that kind of disagreement? How would you go about handling it?
That's a good question. I would handle it. Yours was good too, David. I'm sorry. I didn't need that. I would handle it entirely objectively and just let them know, like with these objective rules, like, those pants aren't doing you any favors, bud. Like, maybe a bit more respectfully than that. Just point out, like, for some guys, when they wear pants too tight, it makes their gut look bigger, even though they're not large people. And so I've just helping them realize that and showing them examples of things that do fit well and how this should look in the created order is generally where I'd go with that.
Ryan?
I guess this is for all four of you, or for whoever wants to answer it. But some might say that, well, because before the fall, there weren't any clothes. And then now after the fall, there are clothes. So because clothes came after the fall, why should we worry so much about clothing?
Do any of you particularly want to answer that?
So I think this is partly what I was talking about with clothing being an extension of the body. So one of the things that clothes do is cover the body for discretion and for modesty. But clothing is also an extension of who we are. And so in extending the body, it's glorifying the body and adding glory to us and explaining more about who we are. So we can think of it as a part of ourselves. Like when Moses wanted to see God's glory on the mountain. It says that God passed by and his train is what Moses saw, which is part of his clothes. It's the tail end of his clothes as an extension of himself and of his glory. So it's not simply a modesty covering. It's also something that beautifies and amplifies.
Also, quickly, we are practicing for heaven because, so we've heard this in other contexts, talking about other things, but if you think about the state of man, there are 4 states of man. The first one is naked and unashamed. The second is naked and ashamed. The third, which is where we are right now, is clothed and ashamed. And the fourth, what is it? Yeah. So we're practicing for heaven. It's not that we won't get, a speed boost once we get there in our practicing doing well, but we do want to be thinking about, is this the kind of thing that I would want to wear before God? Especially on Sunday morning, but every day too.
Bruce. So clothing has changed a lot over the years and millennia. How do you, I guess maybe it's a broad question to all 4 of you, but how do you distinguish, it's like, okay, I like the 20s, I like what they wore, but somebody else might like the mid-1800s and think that if they wear that style, that's dressing well. How do you distinguish between something that's just kind of an opinion about a period with a lot of other things tied to it, as opposed to, I know you gave a lot of principles today, Carter, with like, okay, this is the shape, all that, but how do you find something that's like, okay, this is a good style, timeless, even if that exists, or what, how do you make those distinctions?
So that's the beautiful thing about objective beauty, is it leaves room for personal taste. God gave us personalities and opinions, and we can have those opinions that are rightly ordered and fall within the rules that he has set out for the world. And so something timeless will follow the rules of beauty. Now, personal tastes within those rules. And that's why we all don't dress like King Henry VIII, although I have qualms with his outfits. But so for some people, their personal taste might like the extended shoulders of the 40s. But other people's personal tastes might prefer the more subdued shoulders that we got in like the 70s. And so those, as long as they still follow those principles of silhouette and objective beauty, then they will still be good outfits. It's just your taste can change there.
I want to follow up on that, Carter. Just kind of extend it a little bit. What if someone like was within the 1700s and walked about in like colonial breeches and things like that? Would that be considered simply like personal preference, or would that be, do you think, at some level a failure to dress well because it would be idiosyncratic in a very changed culture of clothing?
Yeah, that's very good. So that's where we come into dressing well is not for yourself, it's dressing well for your neighbor, and you don't want to be drawing attention. You don't want to walk into a room and stand out by what you wear. Now, if you walk into a room where, let's say, everyone is dressed extremely poorly for some reason, then you might dress down a little for that, but you don't have to stoop to their level. You might just wear a more casual outfit, kind of a thing. You would still follow those objective rules of beauty, but you wouldn't be a garbage man and wear a three-piece suit, if we're bringing it back to that. There's different roles within society for different pieces of clothing, if that answers that.
I guess just to quickly change it, the same role in society could look very different in 1700s versus late 1800s, right? Mm-hmm. Just because the type of clothing totally changes.
Yeah, but the role in that sense, then that has become costume, and so it's now serving a different role in modern society, rather than being whatever. If it's like a business suit from the 1700s, it's not serving that purpose anymore. It's serving a different role.
Can I follow up on that one, please?
Yes.
What happens when our jackets and ties become costumes in the more depraved the world is going, and the lack of clothing standards altogether?
Mm-hmm. That's really good. So for me, I think that would depend on, it would depend in a sense on what your peers are doing. Like, obviously don't jump off the bridge if all of them decide we're going to walk around in our underwear because that's where society has gone to. But it's best to find a way to figure out what's culturally acceptable today, including within Christian circles. That's important. And then ensure that that is following those objective rules of beauty within your outfit, and make whatever you have to wear, make that beautiful in that sense, and make that good.
Yeah, question on the same lines about men wearing hats not inside church, but rather on the street. So if you read about like the 1800s, men are always wearing hats. People are ashamed that they don't wear a hat, right? And now coming to today, there's even people arguing that just people who are lazy, don't want to comb their hair, that's why they wear a hat. So should men wear a hat, and why did they do that so often back then?
Mm-hmm. So you got to look at the practical purpose. I'm not super well versed on hats, but at least the way they started was they were workwear and they prevented sunburn and things like that. They protected the head. They became a different cultural norm and stuff like in the 1700s, similar to powdered wigs and things. I'm not super well versed there, but again, it depends on cultural context and then going back to that original purpose. So nowadays, there's some outfits that may call for a hat. Men can still look good in fedoras sometimes, as long as you're not treating it poorly. You don't want to be one of those like Reddit atheist types, but there's always room. So there's some outfits that may look better with a hat. It may add a color that you need to bring into the ensemble, or it may draw attention. It may help to draw attention to your face, kind of a thing. It all depends there.
So Carter, regarding, you mostly talked about formal wear and dressing well. How would you suggest applying these principles to casual wear, just going about your daily life? You had a small comment about t-shirts that I'm curious about.
Yeah. So the t-shirts I'd reserve for workwear, kind of a thing. So with that, you can wear those with pants that still follow those proportions. And if you've been treating your body well and working out and you're your body follows the standard masculine proportions. If you're in shape, your shoulders will be broader than your hips. That's just how men work. Then you can pull off a t-shirt with pants and it will still follow those rules of thirds, for example, and framing the face. I wouldn't necessarily suggest wearing those for daily life and non-workwear situations. A cheap Oxford button-down is one of the best things for that situation. And just leave the top button unbuttoned, let that roll, frame the face, and you're set.
So my question is for women, and it's about jewelry. So I know whenever, like in various times in the Old Testament, whenever the man would go out to get his wife, he would bring a lot of jewelry, and it sounded like she's wearing a lot of jewelry. In our society, I feel like we don't wear a lot of jewelry unless we're I feel like the trans crowd wears more jewelry than the Christian crowd. And I don't tend to wear a lot of jewelry. I'm wearing a small necklace and earrings, but that's it. Just kind of what are your thoughts on that overall?
I think jewelry is a form of glorification. And I mean, often it is precious metals, and so it displays a kind of wealth and a kind of being taken care of. So in some ways it can fall under what Boaz was talking about honoring your father or honoring your husband and showing that you're loved. And so it's really helpful for that. You do have to take into account cultural context, which kind of comes back to what the guys were talking about with idiosyncrasy and fitting in. So you do have to think about how you appear to other people within what is objective. So many things, all things are permissible, but what's going to be helpful for how the way that people perceive you. So some things are going to be objective. When I think about being at peace with all men, or Paul says, I became all things to all people. You do want to fit in to the group that you're in. You want to fit in to your culture and into your subculture and into your peer group, but then some things are just going to be off limits. So when I was working among non-Christians, it was super weird that I didn't cuss. And it was super weird that I wore skirts all the time. Those definitely made me stand out. But then there are other things that you pick up on that could be fine in some contexts, but have some sort of communication. So like nose rings, like what you were talking about in the Bible, that's a very common ornament. I think someday, post-millennially, we will bring back nose rings. But in context, that doesn't tell people what kind of woman I am. So jewelry, just like clothing or other behavior, can be a very good thing, and you just have to pay close attention to the way that it's used around you, because it's visual, and so it is a language.
Yes.
You said a woman's appearance reflects on the care that her father or her husband gives her. How would you suggest women dress who are single and living on their own, as opposed to with parents?
You know about the specifics of how women should.
So this is a really tricky thing, especially for college women. We are sort of functioning as our own household, but we are still covenantally tied, because you're never not going to be covenantally tied. So even if you are living on your own at college, you are still under your dad's headship. And so that is something to think about, is how am I presenting who my dad is? Because as a Christian, you're an ambassador for Christ. And if you wear a cross necklace, or if you even dress somewhat modestly and talk like a Christian, people are going to pick up on that. And they're going to think, oh, she's a Christian. And apparently Christians dress like this. So you're an ambassador in that way. In the same way, and this might be more subconscious to most people, but in the same way, you are an ambassador for your family and for your father. So it is a good thing to think about, am I dressed modestly in a way that when people saw me, they would think, oh, that is a classy girl. She has somebody looking out for her. If when you walk down the street, you look like if something happened, somebody would show up to get you, then you are indicating that you belong to somebody and that somebody's taking care of you. Now, the specifics of that are going to be a lot more specific. But that's kind of the idea and the principle. And you're really never away from your dad. You bear your family name and you bear your family resemblance. And if you're part of his household, then wherever you go, you're showing that off. Which is one of the reasons I say, ask your dad.
This one is for Boaz.
I haven't gotten to say anything this whole time.
For pretty much all of Reformed Christian history, the Reformers interpreted 1 Corinthians 11 in the way that you did today. But relatively speaking, very recently, it's kind of been reinterpreted that because at the very end it says, for the long hair of a woman is a covering, therefore the long hair serves as a covering outside of church and in church, therefore a third covering on the head doesn't matter. What about the 1 Corinthians 11 passage? Dissect what about the passage would make you disagree with that point of view?
Would make me disagree with the view that the only covering required is the hair?
Exactly.
Awesome. Well, yeah, I brought this up here so that I had the text in front of me if I needed it. Right, so we know that a woman's hair is going to glorify her head. This feels so strange. We know that a woman's hair glorifies her head, whether that's her father, whether that's her husband, her hair glorifies her head, right? When Paul is talking about a woman in church, he doesn't just say, and a woman with long hair has her head covered, right? If you look in verse 5, he says, but every woman who prays or prophesies with her head covered dishonors her head, for that is one and the same as if her head were shaved. Right, so there he's presenting two different ways that she could be dishonoring her head, right? Either her head's not covered when she's praying, or her head is shaved. And it wouldn't make sense if we said that those two possibilities were the same thing, right? We can't say, well, the two possibilities he's presenting there, her hair being cut or her not wearing a covering are the same thing, because he presents them in that verse as two different ways that a woman can dishonor her head. If you go on to verse 6, he makes that even more clear, right? For if a woman is not covered, let her also be shorn. The Greek word there is keirasto. That means to cut short, right? So it just doesn't make sense contextually to say, like, if a woman does not have long hair, then she should cut her hair short, right? That just seems like doesn't seem like a very serious way to handle what's going on there in the text, like with the grammar and words he's using. Does that help answer your question? Okay, awesome.
This one's for Carter. How do you dress classy without looking like a Mormon?
I get asked this a lot, so this is great. Mormons really don't dress well. They fall into the same things. They wear skinny pants. They wear low-waisted pants that don't divide their body into thirds. And so by standing out from that, by actually following those rules, you're dressing not like a Mormon. And also, they always wear white shirts. Buy a light blue one. That's an easy solution there. You can wear a white one under a jacket, but light blue is better for day-to-day life. It will complement men's skin tones more, and it's just better overall. So, thank you. Yeah.
Don't look at porn and read your Bible, because when you look at a Mormon and you look at their face, you can tell there's awful things going on in their personal lives. So be a good Christian, and that will go a really, really long way to helping you not look like a Mormon. Besides the things that Carter said.
My question was also about head covering, so for Maz. Specifically that both in the biblically, historically, that the head coverings used in church would be for married women and not for the unmarried woman. And obviously, in the day that we live, it's a little different because women tend to be more independent even though we're not married and even though we're not living at home with our parents. But then shouldn't it not be that head coverings are specifically for married women, or is that at all changed by the fact that certain women are more independent without being married?
Yes. So this issue about head coverings is something that the church has usually agreed on the generalities, the general principle that women should wear some kind of covering in church, but different Christians at different times have taken that in different ways, right? So there are some groups that will say that the coverings are only for a wife, right? Because the Greek word gune can mean either woman or wife, right? But even with early church history, if you think about Tertullian in the 200s, he wrote a whole book called On the Veiling of Virgins, where he argued specifically that unmarried women as well as married women should wear head coverings. He's one of the first of many examples after him. But the idea there is that we're never given any specific indication in this passage that the word gune should be translated as wife specifically, especially when it's contrasted, right? Men and women, andres and gunaikos. You see those two contrasting each other, and we've never taken that passage to mean that only married men have to take off their hats when they pray, right? All the men always take off their hats when they pray. It's a very male-female contrast he's drawing there, which isn't specifically tied to marriage. But like I said, there is a line where you grow up from being a girl from... I can't use hand gestures here. You grow up from being a girl, from being in more of a state of immaturity. You grow up into a woman. And so things like head coverings aren't necessarily required for girls because girls are still in a state of immaturity. But once you grow up and you become a woman and you're put forward as someone eligible for marriage, right? And you're more publicly representing your family as a woman, right? Then that's where you would start wearing head coverings. And there was a last piece of your question.
I don't remember this.
Okay. Does that help answer some of those thoughts?
Can I follow up on that?
Yes.
If women, married or unmarried, are supposed to wear head coverings, but girls don't necessarily have to, should young boys take hats off?
I don't think it's always necessary for very young boys who are still boys to take their hats off because they wouldn't fall under the word aner in Greek. It's only used for adult men most of the time, and so. But I do think that when you have young children, it is good that they start developing habits early before they actually become men. And how do you become a man? How do you become a woman? It's by acting like a man, acting like a woman. When you're a child, you're being trained in how to act in a certain way. So I do think that fathers telling their sons, all right, when you pray, you take your hat off. That's a good thing. It's not as serious of an issue for really young kids, right? When you're born as a girl, you usually don't even have hair coming down from your head, right? So even nature is showing you there that from a young age when you're born, you're not held to this as high of a standard, but as you grow into maturity, the standard grows as well. Sesame?
Okay, same topic. I've only ever heard, in where I come from, I've only ever heard that passage interpreted as like, this was a cultural thing back then, and we don't need to do this anymore at all. Can you respond to that, please?
Yes. So here in this passage, Paul gives commands, right? He talks about hair. he talks about head coverings. Right? Nothing he says would apply specifically to the Corinthian church. Right? He doesn't say, because you're in this culture, therefore do these things. One of the statements he includes is, doesn't nature itself teach you, right, that long hair is a woman's glory, but if a man has long hair, it's his shame, right? That argument is grounded in nature. And then earlier on, when it comes to women wearing the head coverings in church, the phrase he uses there is because of the angels. And I didn't touch on that verse because that'll open a whole can of worms. If you have questions there, I have plenty I can say to that phrase, because of the angels. But he doesn't say there because of the culture or because this is the place you're living in. Whatever the phrase because of the angels means, it's an objective standard that's not going to change based on your culture. Does that make sense? Yeah. Awesome. Devin?
Question for Carter. How would you handle the objection that someone says, sure, we shouldn't do slim fit, but loose pants look sloppy, poor fitted, and just impractical, especially if they go below your shoes. They're just going to get dirty.
So I would let them know they've probably not seen properly fitting pants in that case. There's a ditch on either side. It's Luther's drunk peasant. You either end up on slim fit or you end up on like the baggy pants that were popular in like the 90s. Proper pants, when they're falling, shouldn't fall below the shoe, and they should just break slightly like that. And so they shouldn't puddle and they shouldn't bunch up. But and what that does is when you button your jacket, for example, it creates a unified silhouette on the way down. It doesn't give you like chicken legs sticking out from under your blazer, which a slim fit gives you. It makes you look like a unified whole.
I just kind of, there's a bit of an observational comment based on all the questions happening. Something I've noticed, like especially with the one question of like Paul's letter to the Corinthians, like that was just the cultural norm at the time. We don't have to follow that anymore. If we interpreted the Bible through our cultural lens, we would throw 99% of it out. And that's the thing with the Word of God. It is not based culturally. It is, as terms are used, it's objective. God's truth is objective. It is not culturally based. If our culture slid to where everybody ran around in their underwear, we as Christians would have to defy that culture because the Bible gives us certain commands to be modest.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, you would end up with, right, Paul says the women are to keep silent in churches, right? Who's to say that's not a cultural thing? Then you can have female elders, female pastors, right? And that's just one example, right? Like, there's everything in the Bible would unravel if you interpreted it culturally.
So, just to qualify this, we're mostly talking about the norm, which is maybe the most important thing to rescue. But considering that a lot of people here are, say, students, they may be trying to be creative, they may be thinking critically and realizing value about things in the past. For people who want to innovate or to reclaim, nose rings were brought up earlier. As far as style goes, can you innovate or can you reclaim, or is all of that idiosyncratic?
Yeah, I'm gonna pass the mic on to Nathan. Do you want you? But before I do that, right? Innovation is a good thing, and as Christians, we are called to search out the things of the world, to take dominion over it. We take what God's given us and we glorify it even more. And there's so many things yet that we don't even know about that God has placed in the world for us to glorify further. However, in the culture we're in right now, we're in a point in time where almost all the good innovations that we had discovered up to this point are being thrown out the window left and right. So I would say it's probably more important to reclaim what we had, if you can even rank it that way, which is more important to reclaim, But a spirit of innovation is also very important if you come across something that can enhance that or complement it. Nathan?
This doesn't detract from anything Boaz said, in case it sounds that way. So everything Boaz said, and also being in Moscow right now, especially as college students, I think it's a really good place for us to practice innovation, to practice like pushing lines in some of those places, trying to figure out what might work, and then realizing what really doesn't work. Because if we do that here, we'll have people who smack us and say, hey, cut it out. Or we'll have, half a dozen pastors knocking on our door within 10 minutes saying, okay, buddy, sit down. Where you graduate, you move away, you're somewhere else, and you're thinking about, okay, how can I influence this culture where I am now to, say, dress better? If you haven't been practicing here and failing, then you're not going to really be able to do anything where you go, because you haven't gotten the reps of trying something, failing, trying something, failing, trying something. It worked kind of over and over again. So all that to encourage innovation within the framework of what Boaz said.
Let me add to that.
Yeah.
So, like Nathan was saying, you gotta try and fail. And all in that vein, beauty is a language, and languages take time to learn. And so you learn the language and you figure out how to speak it and you figure out how the grammar works. And then you can start coining new phrases and things like that and writing magnificent works within that framework of that language. So understanding how to speak the language and how the grammar comes first, and then you have a whole world of creativity unlocked for you.
Also, one final thing to add to that, then we'll go to another question. A lot of what may be considered innovation in Moscow by a lot of people is really just reclaiming things that we've lost. And especially in our movement, we've seen that with a lot of different things that have been restored to the church. But I think there's a lot more that we have yet to restore, which may be seen as innovation by some, but it's actually still a kind of reclamation. In the back.
Question for Carter. Where did your inspiration come from? Was it your father that dressed like this and you learned after him? And how many episodes of the Gentleman's Gazette have you watched?
So my father didn't dress like this. He's a roofer in Texas, and so I didn't learn that from him, and I dressed like that throughout the first year of my college career. But as I started reading more books and learning more about philosophies of beauty, I came to realize like there's another way in which this can and should be applied to our lives. As for Gentleman's Gazette, I've watched exactly 2 episodes. One was tying my bow tie for my wedding, and the other was figuring out my little cauliflower for my wedding.
Yes. Got kind of a follow-up to the nose ring. And reclaiming things. Kind of a bit of a question more of, is that something we would want to reclaim? My question there being aesthetically, I'm neither here nor there. I've seen nose rings done nicely. I've seen nose rings done horribly. But symbolically, it was a symbol of slavery. You were owned by somebody else, historically. So I guess, is that something too, that even as Christians, do we reclaim it and rename it even? Or is that something that we should shelve?
Well, a wedding ring also symbolizes that you belong to someone. So I think that's very much on the table. And I think symbolically, it does mean you belong to somebody, and it means that you belong to somebody usually who gave it to you as a gift. And so if you wear something beautiful and precious and expensive that says that you belong to somebody, obviously that could be bad if you're a slave. It could also mean that you're married.
Can I follow up on that? In the prophets, we're told about God rescuing his bride. Right? We see the imagery of God taking this girl in the wilderness and beautifying her. Right? He gives her beautiful clothes to wear, and one of the things that the text says beautifies her is the nose ring. Right? That is not to say that this is the time and place where we should all go and get nose rings. Like Claire said earlier, that could be one of the long-term goals that we have, is to someday incorporate nose rings into a Christian form of dress. But given its cultural connotation, you have to think about what other people will see you as well. We're not in that place in our culture where we could do that yet. But I do agree with Claire that it is on the table somewhere way down the road.
Bruce. Where do you see, like, kind of looking back through history, where do you see the point, maybe there's not one point, but maybe a decade or so of where we started to not really care about how we dressed as a culture, just en masse. Like, you had good chunks of time, and history's kind of cyclical in a lot of ways, where, people have gone through, like, yes, we care, we kind of care, we don't care at all, and then, it spirals again. But where do you think in our history we started to just not really care about that very much?
So speaking for men, I assume it's similar for women's wear, but I haven't studied the history of that near as deeply. It goes along with the rejection of Christian ideals within our culture, and so it really starts kind of after World War II. That's actually when slim fit came about in America. It originated in France, believe it or not. Yeah. But they came to America during and after the war because we had to cut down on fabric rations, and so we ended up with skinnier pants. But ever since then, as we've shifted from a society which places God at the head of things, God, beauty, truth, goodness, and started placing the self in that realm, we've started degrading more and more. So really, you start seeing that most starkly and less between the lines in the 70s, when you get that really over-the-top fashion that emerged at that time that really hadn't been seen in American culture before. And that's because at that time you're seeing the height of prioritizing self over culture and trying to bring attention to yourself. And then after that is continuing to, especially with the rise of mass production in clothing, it's been continuing to devolve into kind of a melting pot of the worst traits that make things cheap in fashion. So I hope that helps.
Let's do one more question and then eat. Ryan?
This is for Carter. How do you feel about cologne?
Cologne can generally be good, as long as you don't overdo it. It's a hygiene thing. So you, looks like you want your hair to smell fine, so you use shampoo. Your body is going to generate odor. You're a man, that's how it works. And your deodorant isn't gonna hide all that. And so just like 2 sprays of cologne, max, is really all you need, and that will help kind of mask some of that musk.